A police officer was missing, tied up, blindfolded, and left to die on an old bridge above the roaring river. No one knew where he was. No one, except his dog. Through the fog and silence, a German shepherd named Shadow broke free and ran. What he did next would defy logic, shatter betrayal, and remind the world what loyalty truly means. What happened that night will make you cry and believe in second chances again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe that no human or animal should ever be left behind, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just change the way you see courage forever. The wind that swept over the town of Hawthorne, Oregon that evening carried a sharp bite of river chill, even though spring was already blooming in the valleys below. Fog drifted like ancient ghosts through the streets, curling around lampposts and whispering beneath cracked sidewalks. Above it all, standing in eerie silence, was the Devil's Span, an old, iron bridge that arched across the Rogue River like the spine of a dying beast. Rust flaked from its girders, and the steel moaned quietly under the wind's pressure, as if remembering every secret it had ever been forced to keep. On that bridge, a man knelt blindfolded, hands bound tight behind his back, knees scraping against the cold metal grating. His name was Officer Ryan Cole, 37 years old, a career cop who had traded the sirens of Portland for the quieter, more honest streets of Hawthorne 5 years ago after losing his wife Hannah in a car crash caused by a drunk driver. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but lean from too many missed meals and too many late nights chasing cases that wouldn't die. His jaw was stubbled, his knuckles scarred from both bar fights and courtrooms. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight. But tonight, that voice was muffled by the tape over his mouth, and the only thing he could hear above the rush of water below was the slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from behind. "Officer Cole," a voice said smoothly, thick with mockery, "you should have left well enough alone." Leon Vargas stepped into view. A man in his early 40s, Latino-American, with a slicked-back haircut and the clean, calculating smile of someone who'd never had to lift a shovel in his life. His charcoal-gray coat swayed slightly in the wind, revealing a black turtleneck beneath and leather gloves that gleamed under the fading sun. Leon had grown from street runner to drug boss in under a decade, not because he was ruthless, though he was, but because he was careful, and because he paid the right people to look the other way. Leon crouched beside Ryan and let out a sigh. "You cops always think you're different. You dig too deep, poke in the wrong shadows, then wonder why the darkness bites back." He stood up, nodded to someone behind Ryan. Ryan couldn't see them, but he could feel the presence, a heavy silence, the scent of cheap cologne and sweat. Then Leon leaned close and whispered, "This bridge has seen a lot of accidents, you know. Slippery railings, sudden gusts. Who would ever question it?" Meanwhile, across town, a woman stood frozen in the flickering glow of a cracked street lamp, a phone trembling in her hand. Emily Harper, 35, was a journalist with the Hawthorne Gazette, one of the few independent papers left in the region. She had shoulder-length blonde curls usually tied back with a pencil, and wore her faded brown jacket like armor. After covering war zones abroad, she'd returned home to care for her sick mother, only to discover that corruption could wear suits just as well as uniforms. She was tenacious, skeptical, and loyal to the truth to the point of recklessness. Her blue eyes scanned the anonymous message on her screen. "Bridge, tonight? Something bad? Ryan?" Her breath caught. Emily and Ryan had history, a complicated friendship that never quite bloomed into something more after Hannah died. Still, she knew him, and she knew he wouldn't be at the bridge for a stroll. She jumped into her old Jeep, engine coughing like an asthmatic bear, and spun toward the river. 3 blocks away, in the outskirts of the industrial park, an old warehouse sat half-swallowed by ivy. Inside, it smelled of rust, dust, and chemicals, and blood. Lying on the cold concrete, paws twitching, was a German shepherd named Shadow. Shadow was 7 years old, thick-furred with black and tan coloring and eyes like melted gold. He had once served in the K-9 unit with Ryan before being medically retired after taking a bullet in the line of duty. Since then, he had become Ryan's closest companion, guardian, roommate, confidant. Shadow was intelligent, loyal, and unnervingly intuitive. He'd saved lives with a bark, found lost children with a sniff, and more than once kept Ryan from slipping into grief's silent undertow. Tonight, though, Shadow had been ambushed, drugged by meat soaked in sedatives and locked inside the warehouse with a rusted chain. But something stirred in him now, a scent. Even through the haze, he recognized it, Ryan's blood. His eyes opened, his limbs trembled, and with a low growl he began to rise. The chain clanked. Shadow's nose flared. He stepped back, crouched low, and lunged. His teeth found the padlock and tugged, twisting, testing. The metal creaked, groaned, and finally snapped. Shadow shot forward, paws thudding across the concrete, nose to the ground. Out the broken door, into the night. Back on Devil's Span, the sky had dimmed to bruised violet. Leon nodded again. A boot nudged Ryan's back. "Goodbye, officer." But before they could move again, a sound pierced the fog. Bark. One, sharp, furious, echoed like a gunshot. Leon paused. "What the?" From the shadows, Shadow emerged, fur bristling, growling low and steady like a storm held just beneath the surface. He charged. "Shoot it!" someone shouted, but the dog was already airborne. The wind howled through the skeletal beams of Devil's Span, rattling loose bolts and hissing through gaps in rusted metal like the whispers of old ghosts. Far below, the rogue river roared with primal rage, its black current gnashing against stone, a beast waiting for something or someone to fall. Officer Ryan Cole hung suspended in that moment between life and death. His body slumped against the cold steel grating, hands bound tightly behind his back with thick, scratchy rope. His knees scraped metal, jeans torn, while blood trickled from a cut on his temple. His dark navy uniform clung to him like a second skin, soaked with sweat and the sharp chill of river fog. A half-torn blindfold hung askew, revealing one bruised eye blinking sluggishly into the night. Behind him, Leon Vargas watched. The crime boss stood at the edge of the bridge, cradling his arm, the one Shadow had bitten just minutes earlier. He winced as blood seeped through his leather glove, but his anger burned brighter than any pain. His sleek charcoal coat fluttered in the wind, revealing a black turtleneck underneath and the polished grip of a pistol at his hip. Beside him, Reed Gangley, pale and nervously twitching, fidgeted with the hem of his coat. His eyes were wide, darting toward the unconscious cop, then away, as if trying to convince himself he hadn't gone too far. "He's not dead," Reed mumbled. Leon spat into the fog without looking. "He will be. That fall's steep, and the current's strong." But something in Leon hesitated. Unfinished business always haunted him. Behind a line of scorched pine trunks just off the bridge's southern flank, Emily Harper crouched low in the wet underbrush, clutching her camera. The lens was trained through a gap in the railings, catching every shadow, every cruel smirk on Leon's face. She had arrived too late to stop it, but just in time to capture the truth. Emily's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. Her blue eyes locked onto Ryan's still form, then darted to the two men standing above him. She whispered a silent curse, her thumb hovering over the phone's record button. Then she saw the blur. A streak of black and tan fur surged through the fog. Shadow. The German shepherd erupted from the mist like vengeance with fangs. He didn't bark. He roared through the air, leaping at Leon with raw fury. His jaws clamped down on the bleeding arm again, ripping a fresh scream from the crime boss. Reed stumbled backward, slipping on the damp metal, gun falling from his grasp. Leon howled, punching at the dog's muzzle with his free hand. "Shoot it! Reed, shoot it!" But Reed hesitated, his hands shook, and Shadow was a blur of movement. Claws scraped metal. Fur bristled. Teeth snapped inches from Leon's throat. Then, in a blink, Shadow released and turned, racing past Ryan, sniffing, circling, inspecting. He pressed his nose to Ryan's chest. Still breathing. Leon staggered back, fury in his eyes. "Kill the dog! Now!" But before Reed could reach for his fallen weapon, Shadow growled, low and deep like a distant thunderclap. He stood between Ryan and the men, stance rigid, tail bristled, golden eyes locked. And just then, from beyond the bridge, came the faint wail of sirens. Emily had done more than film. She had sent the signal. Leon cursed under his breath. "We're done here." He grabbed Reed by the collar, dragging him backward. In seconds, the fog swallowed them. Shadow didn't move. He stood sentry over his fallen human, breath heaving, flanks trembling. He nudged Ryan's shoulder once gently, then again. Ryan groaned. Emily rushed forward, dropping her camera in the wet grass. "Ryan!" Shadow stepped aside, letting her kneel. Her hands moved, quickly checking pulse, checking breath, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "You're okay. You're safe," she whispered, voice cracking. Ryan blinked up at her, eyes dazed. "Emily?" She nodded, tears forming. "Yeah, I'm here." Shadow sat beside them, his tail sweeping once across the grating. He had found him. He had saved him. But the night wasn't over yet, not with Leon Vargas still free. The fog hadn't lifted. It only thickened. By morning, it clung to the hills like wool soaked in rain, drowning the edges of Hawthorne in gray. The bridge, the water, the blood, gone, swallowed by mist and memory. Emily Harper stood still beneath a pine tree just off Devil's Span, fingers trembling around her camera. She had just witnessed a man someone she knew, someone she once loved, get shoved off a bridge. And there was nothing she could do. Through the zoom lens, she saw the wheelchair tip. She saw Ryan vanish over the railing, then the mist had closed in. Silence followed. There was no scream, no splash, no movement. Only shadow remained. The dog had barked, growled, then disappeared. Emily had waited, breath frozen in her throat. But Ryan never resurfaced. She reviewed the footage again. The camera had caught the key moment. The scuffle, the push, the fall. A silhouette she knew was Leon. His voice, clear. The threats, the intent. The snarl of tires as they drove off. But no faces, no direct evidence, and no Ryan. In her mind, he was gone. Emily clutched the strap of her bag tighter and whispered to herself, "If he's really gone, then I'm not letting Leon get away with it." She left the trees and headed east toward the abandoned freight depot near the edge of town. The Hawthorne Freight Depot sat rotting beneath the rust-colored sky of morning. Ivy strangled the fence. Windows were cracked like spider webs, and the loading docks sagged under decades of silence. It was the kind of place the city had forgotten, and where secrets liked to rot. Leaning against a rusted-out delivery truck, smoking something hand-rolled and foul-smelling, was old Marty. Marty Reynolds, late 60s, looked like a Vietnam relic that never returned home properly. His green army coat hung off his shoulders like it remembered better days. He had sunken eyes, tobacco-stained teeth, and a voice like broken gravel. Years ago, he'd been Leon's driver. Then Leon didn't need him anymore, and Marty ended up exactly where Leon left him, in the cold. Emily approached slowly, camera tucked away. "You got my message?" Marty nodded, didn't look up. "I saw the footage." Emily blinked. "Already?" He took a drag. "I hear things. Ain't hard in this town. People love a whisper more than a prayer." Emily hesitated. "He didn't make it." For the first time, Marty looked at her. "You sure?" She faltered. "I saw him fall. That drop. No one survives that." Marty said nothing, just tapped ash off the edge of his boot. Emily handed him a photo Leon beside a community center, all smiles and false charity. "Tell me about this place." Marty snorted. "Leon's front. Says it's for at-risk youth. Really just a money funnel. His brother signs the paperwork, but Leon runs the show." Emily jotted it down. "Who launders the money?" He shook his head. "You want that name, Harper, you'll need more than smokes and sad eyes." Emily's jaw tensed. "A cop died last night. Ryan Cole, I'm not walking away from this." Before Marty could answer, a bark echoed through the fog. Sharp, urgent. Emily turned instantly. Another bark, closer this time. "Shadow!" She turned and saw him. Mud-splattered, eyes burning with intensity, standing just at the edge of the platform. The German shepherd barked again, then turned and sprinted toward the tree line. Emily didn't ask. She ran. Branches clawed at her coat as she pushed through the underbrush, shadow barely visible ahead. Her breath came fast. Her legs burned. But she didn't stop. Shadow darted between trees with purpose, never once looking back. Then he slowed, paused, looked over his shoulder, as if to say. Emily stepped into a small clearing and froze. Ryan was slumped against a moss-covered log, body twisted, face pale. Dried blood crusted his temple and his jacket was soaked through, dirt-streaked and torn. But his chest moved. "Ryan!" She dropped to her knees beside him, pulling her bag off, digging for gauze and water. Ryan stirred. His lips parted. I'm here," she whispered, brushing damp hair from his brow. "You're okay." "No," he rasped, voice faint. You saw. I saw everything," she said, tears burning her eyes. "But I thought you were gone." Ryan gave a ghost of a smile. "Not yet." She helped him drink, wiped his face. Shadow sat just behind them, eyes flicking left and right, ears pricked. Something in the trees shifted, a sound barely audible. Emily froze. Shadow growled. A man stepped from the fog. Mid-30s, thick-set, dressed in a gray hoodie and tactical boots. His face was smooth, forgettable. His eyes were not. Cold, flat, merciless. He raised a gun. "I'm only here for him." Emily stood up between them. "You're not touching him!" The man took a step forward. "Move, lady. You don't get a second chance." But Shadow was already airborne. The shepherd slammed into the man's chest like a cannonball. The gun fired once into the trees before clattering to the ground. The man hit the dirt with a grunt as Shadow's jaws closed around his forearm. He screamed, tried to roll, but Shadow was relentless. Emily grabbed the pistol, pointed it with shaking hands. "Don't move!" The man looked up, blood on his sleeve, eyes wide. Ryan forced himself upright, leaning against the log. "Get out," he rasped. "Tell Leon." He failed. The man stared between the barrel and the growling dog, then bolted, disappearing into the mist. Emily dropped to her knees again, heart pounding. "Are you okay?" Ryan gave her a half-smile. "You always come late, but you always show." She laughed, choking back a sob. "Still breathing, aren't you?" Beside them, Shadow sat, calm, silent, unshaken. He had done what no one else could. The rain came without warning, the kind that arrives on a hush of wind and breaks all at once, pounding the forest like drumming fists. The muddy ground sucked at boots and bark alike, trees sagging under the sudden weight of water. Every leaf shimmered, every breath tasted of moss, iron, and earth. Emily Harper shoved her shoulder harder against the warped wooden door of the old cabin until it gave, creaking open into stale darkness. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mildew, the scent of forgotten things. She turned to Ryan, his arm draped over her shoulders, half walking, half dragging his injured frame inside. Shadow circled the cabin twice before entering, his paws wet, his fur dripping. The cabin sat deep in the woods, barely visible from the old trails that once served logging trucks decades ago. Its roof sagged at the corners, moss curled over its shingles, and the windows had long since been eaten by time. But it was dry, for now. Ryan collapsed onto a dusty cot in the corner. His breathing was ragged, jaw clenched. Emily knelt beside him, peeling off his soaked jacket. "Sorry," she said. "I don't think this place comes with heating." Ryan managed a smirk through the pain. 5 stars. Very rustic. Emily smiled tightly, then rose and pulled a tattered curtain across the nearest broken window. She moved with purpose, the adrenaline from the attack still thick in her blood. As she set down her bag, she pulled out her phone, a cracked, outdated model barely clinging to life. Signal. 1 bar. Good enough. She tapped out a message and attached the video she'd filmed the night before. Leon's voice, Ryan's fall, the attack in the woods. Then she sent it to Julia Kent, an old colleague and editor at an independent investigative outlet in Portland. Julia was smart, fearless, and never blinked at a story that smelled like fire. If anyone could blow Leon's operation open, it was her. Outside, the rain deepened. Thunder grumbled above the canopy. Emily returned to Ryan with a bottle of water and some gauze. "Tell me what you were doing out here alone," she said. "And don't say patrolling." Ryan let out a low breath. "I wasn't patrolling. I was following something." "Leon?" Ryan nodded. "I got wind of shipments, trucks, late nights, the same pattern. At first I thought it was drugs, but then—" He looked down, his voice thinning. "One night I saw them unloading people, mostly women, some barely more than girls, duct-taped, bruised. They were herded like animals into vans with covered plates." Emily's stomach turned. "Trafficking?" "Yes, and it's not just Leon. He's a cog. There's a bigger ring, I just haven't traced it yet. That's why I kept it quiet. If the department knew, it would leak. And if it leaks, they kill you." Ryan didn't reply. His silence said enough. Shadow stood by the door, ears twitching. His body was still, but every part of him was alert. Nostrils flaring, tail held low and rigid. Emily followed his gaze. "What is it?" Shadow let out a low growl. Ryan sat up straighter despite the pain. "Someone's here!" Emily rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek. But the rain was too heavy, a moving wall of silver. "I don't see anything." Shadow barked once, sharply, then padded to the back of the cabin and sniffed the floorboards near the kitchen wall. There, under a warped plank, lay a trapdoor, old, rotted, but usable. Ryan blinked. "I thought this place looked familiar. There's an old root cellar. Probably connects to the hillside runoff path." The bark came again, louder, and then they smelled it. Smoke. Not fireplace smoke, not the comforting kind. This was sharp, bitter, acrid. Emily's eyes widened. "They're burning us out." Shadow barked again and bolted toward the trapdoor, pawing at it furiously. Ryan gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. "We have to move, now!" Emily threw her shoulder against the trapdoor and it groaned open. Shadow disappeared down first, leading the way. Ryan followed next, stumbling on the steps, supported by Emily behind. As they reached the bottom, firelight flickered behind them through the cracks in the wood. Smoke filtered through the floorboards in wisps that coiled like snakes around the ceiling beams. The passage beneath the cabin was tight and earthen, smelling of rot and old roots. The floor was damp, squelching underfoot. The sound of fire crackling above was muffled but real and growing. Emily led with her phone's flashlight, the narrow beam catching the glint of wet stones and half-collapsed wooden supports. Ryan shuffled behind her, leaning against the wall when his balance failed. Shadow stayed beside him, guiding his pace, every few seconds looking back to ensure they weren't being followed. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened up to a small stone-lined opening near the bottom of the ravine, hidden behind a curtain of moss and ferns. Rain beat down just outside, dousing any trace of flame or smoke that tried to follow. They emerged into the open, coughing, soaked again, but alive. Ryan collapsed to the wet ground, rain mixing with soot on his skin. Emily knelt beside him, brushing wet hair from his eyes. "That," he gasped, "was too close." She gave him a look. "Welcome to my world." Shadow stood at the edge of the moss curtain, head lifted, scanning the woods. His ears flicked, but no one followed. Not yet. They were safe. For now. By the time they reached the outskirts of Hawthorne again, the storm had passed, but the air was soaked with memory. Rainwater still dripped from the eaves of houses and ran in rivulets down the gravel roads. birds began to stir in the trees, cautiously testing their voices. Emily parked the pickup she'd borrowed an old rust bucket belonging to Marty that miraculously still ran behind a grove of overgrown cedar trees, out of sight from the road. She turned off the ignition and looked at Ryan. His eyes were dull from exhaustion, his jaw clenched from the constant pain in his shoulder and ribs, but he managed to nod. "It's still here?" Emily stepped out and pointed past a weathered stone wall. "It should be. The town forgot about it, but you didn't." Nestled behind a crumbling brick fence overrun by ivy and wild rose bushes was St. Jude's Church, once a community refuge, now a boarded-up relic. The steeple leaned slightly to the left, the front doors were chained shut, and the stained glass windows were missing more than a few colored shards. Ryan stared at it for a long moment. "Hannah and I came here every Sunday after the accident. She said it was the only place where my silence didn't make her feel alone." Hannah, his late wife. Emily didn't press. She helped him toward the back where the ground sloped behind the sacristy. Shadow led the way, tail low, ears alert. His coat, though damp and streaked with dried ash, still shimmered slightly in the morning sun. The back entrance had rotted off its hinges years ago. They stepped carefully into a small utility room that led to a trap door half covered in pine needles and moss. Emily pulled it open. The air that rushed out was cold and still. The old cellar lay beneath the church like a secret long buried, its walls made of stone and floor of packed earth. It had once stored wine and food donations, now it held only silence. They lit the way with the flashlight on Emily's phone. Ryan sank onto an overturned pew in the corner while Shadow began sniffing the edges of the room, nose low to the ground. "I haven't been here since—" Ryan trailed off. "After Hannah died, I locked this place up. Couldn't bear to come back." Emily walked carefully through the space. Shelves lined one wall, holding dusty hymnals, rusted tins, and what looked like remnants of old church bake sales. At the far end was a table covered in a tarp. She pulled it back. Beneath it sat a rusting metal box, locked tight. "Do you think she left anything here?" Ryan rubbed his face. "I don't know. Hannah was meticulous. She kept records of everything. Before she passed, she told me, if anything happened to her, not to trust what people said about her last job." Emily turned. "You mean Leon's shell company?" Ryan nodded. "She worked for them as an accountant. Said it was clean. Then one night she came home, scared. Said she found numbers that didn't make sense, transfers to offshore accounts, cash going in and out without explanation." "You think she hid something here?" "I think she tried." At that moment, Shadow let out a sharp bark and pawed at a half-rotted wooden beam low on the back wall. Emily rushed over, crouched, and pried at the spot with a broken chair leg. The wood cracked, then peeled back. Inside was a small, dust-covered envelope taped to the wall, and behind it, a silver USB stick. Emily pulled it out, heart racing. She did. Ryan stared at the small object in her palm like it was glowing. They didn't speak for a moment. Then, from outside, a low crunch of gravel. Shadow growled. Emily stuffed the USB into her jacket pocket and helped Ryan to his feet. Elsewhere in town, Sheriff Walter Griggs stood in front of his office's main desk, fingers drumming against the counter. Griggs, now 56, still carried the authority of a man who'd once been a respected figure. But over the years, the weight of quiet deals, buried files, and off-the-books cash had twisted that posture into something heavier. His silver hair was always combed back perfectly, his uniform pressed, but behind those pale blue eyes was calculation, not protection. His deputy, Lyle Becker, entered the room. Mid-30s, buzz-cut, stocky build, always 2 steps behind his own thoughts. "Sir, we got confirmation," Lyle said. "Cole's alive. Escaped the fire in the woods." Griggs's jaw ticked. "So, the arson didn't take." "No, sir, and Harper's involved. The old freight depot security camera pinged her plate last night." Griggs nodded slowly. "Put out a notice. Wanted for obstruction and endangerment. Don't make noise. Just make it official." Lyle blinked. "Even if it's not?" Griggs cut him off. "Do it." He turned to the window, watching the clouds roll in again. If they're getting close to what Hannah left behind, we don't have much time. Back beneath St. Jude's, Emily double-checked the back exit through the vestry. Clear, she whispered. They stepped out into the narrow garden path behind the church, now overgrown with ivy and wet leaves. Ryan moved slower now, every step deliberate. Shadow pressed close to his side, gently nudging his hip when his balance wavered. Emily kept her hand on the pocket holding the USB. We need to get this to Julia. Tonight. Ryan looked at her. What if they find out? They already have, she said, but they're too late. Shadow paused at the top of the stone steps leading to the street, ears raised. Then, slowly, his tail gave a small wag not joy, but readiness. They moved into the daylight, back into the storm waiting to break again. The orchard stretched for miles along the misty edge of Hawthorne's northern border. Once thriving and filled with schoolchildren picking apples in fall, it had long been left untended. Trees grown wild, branches tangled like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. The overripe scent of fermenting fruit drifted through the air, sweet and sickly. Mud squelched underfoot, and the morning sun had yet to break the wall of low-hanging clouds. Emily crouched near the back of an old produce truck parked between rows of gnarled trees. She wore a rain-stained flannel jacket, her blonde curls tucked under a knit beanie, mud streaked on her jeans. With one hand, she adjusted the tiny bug she had just secured beneath the passenger seat. With the other, she texted one word to an encrypted contact. Planted. The truck belonged to Leon Vargas Sleek, armored and out of place among the rusted skeletons of old tractors and sagging wooden crates. She had tracked him here earlier that morning, watching from a distance as he arrived with 4 men. Emily had followed them for days, studying their habits, routines, and weaknesses. One of them, Denny Clark, mid-20s, Latino, short-cropped hair and a nervous gait, had recently started lingering near the same food truck Emily frequented. After a few casual conversations and a shared cigarette, he had quietly passed her a note. I want out. He's going to kill us all. I'll help. She didn't trust him completely, but she didn't ignore him either. Now, with the recorder live, she slid back into the shadows and vanished between the apple trees. Elsewhere in the orchard, Ryan Cole leaned against a leaning apple tree, his breathing shallow. His shoulder had started bleeding again, dark red soaking through the hastily bandaged wound. His knees buckled once, but Shadow nudged him upright, pressing gently into his thigh. They were running. Again. I swear, Ryan muttered through clenched teeth, we need to stop meeting bullets like this. Shadow didn't respond. He simply looked up with those steady amber eyes and turned, signaling it was time to move again. The orchard had once been part of the Lambert family estate, generations of apple growers who abandoned it when tariffs, taxes, and tragedy forced them out. Now, the area was a forgotten piece of land on the edge of state jurisdiction, exactly the kind of place someone like Leon would use as a hunting ground. Ryan and Shadow weaved through the trees, boots sinking in patches of mud, branches whipping their faces. Behind them, voices shouted Leon's crew, closing in. Ryan recognized 2 of them by voice. Crew's tall, muscular, with a voice like gravel and a reputation for using fists before guns, and Mick, wiry and jumpy, always wearing fingerless gloves, with a habit of muttering threats under his breath. Fan out, Cruz barked. Check the gully. He's bleeding. He won't get far. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed on. Back near the trucks, Emily blended into a group of migrant workers picking over the rotten fruit for livestock feed. She borrowed a cloth apron, slung an empty basket over one arm, and kept her head down. She could hear Leon yelling into his phone, pacing outside the truck. This ends today, he hissed. I want him dead. I want that USB, and I want the dog's head on my goddamn dashboard. Emily's stomach twisted. She moved to the edge of the group and took a position with a clearer view of the men combing the orchard. In her earpiece, the receiver from the bug in Leon's truck crackled faintly, enough to know where he was, enough to stay one step ahead. Back in the trees, Ryan stumbled near a pile of fallen crates and dropped to one knee. He touched his shoulder and winced. Blood again. He reached out blindly for balance. Shadow pressed close, then did something unexpected. He turned and bolted. "Shadow?" Ryan called after him. "Where are you?" But Shadow had a plan. The German shepherd darted toward a parallel row of trees, barking loudly, kicking up wet leaves, and leaving a smear of blood from Ryan's bandage he'd swiped earlier across his coat. He ran in wide arcs, drawing noise, snapping branches, and leaving a false trail. It worked. Cruz and Mick turned at once. "There! The dog! Follow it!" They charged in the direction Shadow had gone, crashing through the orchard like bulls through a cornfield. Ryan, watching from behind the crate pile, allowed himself a grim smile. Then he looked to his left, where Shadow had originally sniffed out a hollow in the orchard floor, a stone trap door half covered by moss and collapsed brush. A storm shelter. He crawled toward it and yanked it open with his good arm. The musty air below was thick and cold, but it was cover. He climbed down. Shadow led Cruz and Mick on a twisting chase, barking and leaping over fallen logs, zigzagging through ravines. Finally, when he was certain they were far enough, he doubled back, circling around them with expert precision. His training returned like muscle memory patterns, escape routes, decoys. When he returned to the orchard's heart, he found the open storm shelter door and slipped inside, panting, wet but triumphant. Ryan looked up from the dark corner where he sat slumped against a support beam. "That's my boy." Shadow licked his hand once, then laid down at his feet, eyes on the entrance. Meanwhile, Emily stepped away from the crowd and sent another encrypted message to Julia. "Leon hunting in the orchard, USB safe, recording clean. Need extraction plan ASAP." Then her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "They're closing in. Get out. D. Denny." She looked around, then disappeared into the orchard just as Leon emerged from the truck with 2 more men. The rain had turned to sleet by dawn, painting the rooftops of Portland with a pale sheen of silver. The city stirred beneath gray skies, unaware that in a secured wing of the Providence Medical Center, one man had returned from the dead. Ryan Cole lay in a hospital bed, his right arm wrapped in thick bandages, shoulder dislocated but set. Monitors beeped softly beside him, and the faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. Shadow, his loyal German shepherd partner, rested near the foot of the bed, his body curled tight but ears always alert. Every so often the dog would lift his head to scan the hallway, as though still unsure the danger had truly passed. The rescue had come just in time. The night before, Emily Harper had sent out a scrambled signal via a modified police frequency, using the gear from a hidden transmitter she carried in her coat. It was a desperate act, relying on the hope that someone still loyal in the department was listening, and someone had. The signal reached Lieutenant Adrian Reeves, a decorated SWAT commander known for his clean record and distrust of Leon Vargas. Reeves, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with graying temples and eyes that never blinked under pressure, had led the response. His team stormed the orchard perimeter using night vision and thermal scans. They found Ryan barely conscious in an old drainage tunnel, Shadow pressed against his bleeding shoulder, growling low at every movement. Emily had been there too, guiding them with whispers from a hidden comm, refusing to leave until she saw Ryan lifted into the helicopter. Now, less than 24 hours later, Ryan sat in a courtroom under special medical clearance, his arm in a sling, and a cold fire in his eyes. The courthouse was unusually tense. Word had spread Officer Ryan Cole, once declared a fugitive, was not only alive but had evidence that could take down Leon Vargas and his network. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere rippled with the gravity of it all. Leon Vargas sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him, his attorney flipped pages with mechanical indifference, but even he looked rattled when the bailiff brought in Shadow. The German shepherd, now wearing a certified police vest, walked calmly beside Ryan as he entered the room. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Cameras clicked. Shadow's presence wasn't just symbolic, it was evidence in muscle and memory. The judge presiding over the trial was Honorable Miriam Blake, a woman of imposing presence despite her short frame. In her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun and dark green robes flowing behind her, she was known across Oregon for her intolerance toward corruption and theatrics. "Mr. Cole," she said, peering down through her glasses, "you understand you're here under special medical consideration. Are you able to testify?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ryan replied, voice still hoarse but unwavering. "And the animal? He's not just a service dog. He's a witness." The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Nguyen, began her questioning. Rachel, sharp in a navy pantsuit, was known for dismantling defense strategies with surgical precision. "Detective Cole, walk us through the moment you were taken," she said. Ryan recounted the bridge, the cold wind, the rope. He spoke of Leon's voice in the dark. He said, "Cops don't belong where I do business." Then he pushed. Rachel nodded. "And how did you survive?" "I should have died," Ryan said. He looked down at Shadow. "But he found me, held me there, pulled at the rope. He didn't leave my side." Next came Emily's footage edited to enhance the audio and stabilize the image. The courtroom watched in silence as the screen flickered with shaky images of the bridge, the struggle, and a faint silhouette of Leon's outline. It wasn't perfect, but combined with the voice match and timestamps, it was damning. Then Rachel played the recording Emily had planted audio from Leon's vehicle. "I don't care if the cop's still breathing. Burn that damn shack," Leon's voice crackled. The courtroom gasped. Ryan's jaw tightened. Shadow stiffened. The defense scrambled. Leon shifted in his seat for the first time, but the blow wasn't over. Rachel nodded to the court doors. They opened, and Sheriff Walter Griggs was brought in, hands cuffed, flanked by 2 officers. The once feared lawman of the neighboring county now looked pale, unshaven, a shell of power. A second, recording this one from Emily's hidden camera, showed him accepting a briefcase in an alley. Judge Blake's gavel hit the wood. "The court will recess to process this new evidence. Sheriff Griggs is to be remanded immediately." As the court resumed, a final witness was brought forward, a young boy, no more than 11, with dark hair and nervous hands. His name was Carlos Mendez, a survivor. He took the stand, flanked by a social worker, and pointed at Leon. "That's the man," he said, voice trembling. "He made us stay in the trucks. He said if we screamed, the dogs would come." Rachel bent beside him. "You're safe now, Carlos." The boy nodded slowly, then added, "But I like dogs now. That one saved my friend." He pointed to Shadow. There was silence. Then someone in the back of the room clapped. The judge scowled. "Order." Near the end of the session, Leon finally turned his eyes toward Ryan. It wasn't defiance this time. It was warning. Shadow stood instantly, a low growl vibrating in the floorboards. His fur bristled. Eyes locked. The guards stepped forward, but the judge raised her hand. "Let the dog speak." She turned to Rachel. "Motion for increased security?" "Filed and granted, Your Honor." Outside, Emily watched from the steps, phone in hand, typing the first lines of her article. When the system failed, it was loyalty, not the badge, that brought justice back into daylight. She looked up as Shadow walked past her, nudging her side briefly. Then back to Ryan, who stood tall despite the sling. Tomorrow would be sentencing. But today, the truth had spoken. Morning arrived with a soft hush over the town of Rogue Bend. The river, once wild with spring snowmelt, now flowed gently beneath the old bridge where shadows once danced between life and death. Mist clung to the surface like a secret, rising in lazy swirls as the sun cut through a thinning veil of clouds. In a wooden house nestled by the riverbank, modest, 2 stories, painted a fading pine green. Ryan Cole stood on the porch with a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. His right shoulder had healed enough to let him stretch again. A faint scar lingered beneath his t-shirt like a whisper from another life, but he no longer winced when lifting his arm. Time, therapy, and shadow had all played their parts. The porch swing creaked as Ryan sat down. The old boards beneath his boots moaned like they had stories too. And beside him, ever faithful, sat Shadow, the 6-year-old German shepherd with amber eyes that missed nothing. His coat gleamed in the golden light. Thick and healthy now, the bruises of war washed away in the rhythm of peaceful days. Shadow wore a new tag on his collar. It read, Certified Emotional Support Companion, State of Oregon. Not that Ryan needed a piece of metal to remind him what the dog meant. They sat there each morning watching the river. The bridge, once a stage for death, had become part of their ritual. Every morning they'd cross it together, side by side. No more chases, no more bullets, just the sound of wind and pause. Leon Vargas had been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and human trafficking had stacked higher than his lawyers could swat away. When the sentence was handed down, he didn't speak. He just stared at Ryan as if the war between them had never ended. But Ryan didn't return the look. He never had to see Leon again. Sheriff Griggs was in a different prison, one with tighter walls and no escape. His betrayal had struck the town deeper than Ryan expected. Some officers quit, others stepped up. The department was under full investigation, but change, real change, was underway. Emily Harper pulled up in a dusty gray Jeep, parking under the maple tree near the house. She stepped out wearing jeans and a forest green jacket, her hair tied back but still catching the sun in wild strands. Her face looked different now, less guarded, more alive. She carried a brown satchel slung across her body, and in her hands a thick, newly printed book. It was her article, or rather, the story of it all, titled The Bridge Between Silence and Truth. The piece had been picked up by national outlets and had recently been awarded the Westbrook Prize for Investigative Journalism. Emily climbed the porch with a smile. "Coffee still bad?" she teased. "Worse," Ryan replied, scooting over on the swing to make space. "But it's hot, and that's enough." She handed him the book. "You're in Chapter 4. Shadow gets a whole chapter to himself." Shadow raised his head slightly at the mention of his name, then laid it back down with a satisfied grunt. They sat together in silence, watching the river like they had for the past few Sundays. Ryan turned toward her. "You ever think about staying?" Emily tilted her head. "In Rogue Bend?" He nodded. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I think I'll keep visiting, for now." And that was enough. Everything, these days, moved slow, on purpose. That afternoon, the town held its annual spring fair. Children raced down dirt paths with cotton candy in their hands. There were booths with handmade quilts, and teenagers handed out lemonade in paper cups. Ryan walked through the crowd with Shadow at his side, people smiling and patting the dog as they passed. Shadow, now a local hero, wore a red kerchief around his neck. A badge pin had been fastened to it, not officially issued but handed to Ryan by the new interim police chief as a symbol of gratitude. Later that day, as the fair began to wind down, a woman with tear-streaked cheeks ran into the crowd screaming her son's name. "Lucas! Lucas! Where are you?" A hush spread through the crowd. Ryan approached her calmly. She was in her mid-30s, blonde hair tucked into a ball cap, panic twisting her features. "He was right behind me," she cried. "He's only 6. He's afraid of loud noises." Ryan knelt beside Shadow. "Find the boy." The command was quiet, almost casual, but Shadow knew. His ears perked, his body tensed. Without a bark or growl, he bolted into motion nose to the ground, zigzagging through the fairgrounds, past the hot dog stand, around the hay rides, then toward the woods. Minutes passed like hours. Then a bark, sharp, proud, unwavering. Ryan and the others followed, hearts in their throats. They found Shadow at the edge of a thicket, standing guard beside a crying little boy who had curled up beneath a bench near the edge of the forest, hands over his ears. Shadow nudged the boy gently with his snout, tail wagging. The boy looked up, eyes wide, then slowly reached out to hug the dog. By the time his mother arrived, breathless and weeping, Shadow stood beside her like a silent promise. "Thank you," she whispered. Ryan simply smiled. He's good at finding lost things. That evening, back at the house, Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea while Ryan grilled 2 steaks. Shadow lay in the grass nearby, eyes half closed, breathing even. Do you think he knows? Emily asked quietly. Ryan glanced over. Knows what? That he saved your life. Saved that boy. That he keeps saving us. Ryan didn't answer right away. He flipped the steak and watched the flames. Then, I think he knows enough, and I think that's all he needs. A breeze stirred the chimes above the door. They sang softly, 3 notes, then silence. Shadow lifted his head and looked toward the bridge. Tomorrow morning, they'd walk it again, just like always. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with flashing lights or roaring thunder. They arrive quietly on 4 paws in the shape of loyalty, love, and second chances. Shadow didn't just save Ryan's life. He reminded us all that healing can begin with trust, that hope can be reborn even after betrayal, and that love, true, patient love, will always find its way home. God often works through the small and faithful, a whisper in the dark, a dog's bark in the night, a stranger's kindness. In this story, we witnessed how one man, one woman, and one brave soul with fur became a force of light in a world full of shadows. So if you're watching this right now, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Maybe there's someone who needs your faith. Maybe you are someone's miracle waiting to happen. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below with amen if you believe that no one human or animal should ever be abandoned or forgotten. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the goodness still left in this world. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide you in times of doubt. And may you always remember, sometimes angels walk among us on 4 legs.